So welcome to everyone who's on with us this afternoon or this evening, depending on where in the world you are joining us from. I'm Loralee Scott, Director of Pacifica Online at Pacifica Graduate Institute, and I'm so thrilled and so excited to be able to share this conversation with all of you. You know, it was over now 2.5 years ago. COVID-19 unexpectedly plunged the entire world into a state of global crisis that preyed on some of our most basic fears: mortality, isolation, scarcity, and uncertainty. The pandemic ushered in both an unprecedented demand for mental health services, as well as profound changes in the way psychotherapy was practiced. Global containment measures forced clinicians and therapists around the world, I'm sure many of you that are on with us this afternoon, to transform overnight from in-person to entirely online practices. Now, here we are over 2.5 years later. Many analysts, therapists, clinicians continue to work remotely. And from the perspective of psychoanalytic practice, and I think, Stefano, this was you brought this to my attention, but from the perspective of psychoanalytic practice, the pandemic could be viewed as the greatest natural social experiment in contemporary memory. Today, even as new variants continue to pose challenges, it's important to pause in order to reflect on how the methods, approaches, and even possibly the soul of analysis may have been permanently altered. So I am thrilled and honored to be introducing you to, if you're not already familiar with their work and scholarship, introducing you to Monica Luci and Stefano Carpani, who will be talking with us today about their newly released book from Routledge. It just came out on Monday, the 17th, Jungian Perspectives on How the Pandemic Changed Psychoanalysis. Let me just give you a brief bio for Monica and Stefano. Monica Luci is a Jungian and relational psychoanalyst. She has a private practice in Rome. She's the author, translator, and editor of publications on the themes of trauma, displacement, collective violence, sexuality, and gender, among which she has published the monographs Torture, Psychoanalysis, and Human Rights, that was published by Routledge in 2017, as well as Torture Survivors in Analytic Therapy, Young Politics and Culture, which came out this year. Stefano Carpani is a psychoanalyst. He's the editor of Breakfast at Kuznach, published by Chiron, The Plural Turn in Jungian and Post-Jungian Studies, that was published by Routledge last year. The Anthology of Contemporary Classics in Analytical Psychology, The New Ancestors, and Individuation and Liberty in a Globalized World, Psychosocial Perspectives on Freedom After Freedom, both of which were published this year by Routledge. And in our chatting before everyone joined on, I asked him if he was in the midst of writing another book. He told me, yes, he's in the midst of writing 2 more books. So both Stefano and Monica, thank you so much for joining us and being here with us today.
Thank you. Good evening.
So we're going to start with this question, a pretty obvious one. What is it? So if we can all think back 2.5 years ago, and it's really tough when you say think back 2.5 years ago, right? When I think back 2.5 years ago, it's a little surreal. It's because it's a different world and a whole different mindset that I was in. But when you think back to before this book was written, what was it that you were seeing, hearing, experiencing that prompted you to say, hey, we need to write this book?
Well, as you know, I like to talk to people, not just because I'm a psychoanalyst, but because I interview people. And one reason why I like to talk to people, to our colleague, is to record what our most senior member, the so-called post-Jungians, or the new ancestor, as I call them, have something relevant to say. So in March 2020, when we were all home and lost and scared, I did what I like to do. I contacted John Beebe, Murray Stein, Verena Kast, Andrew Samuels, and I asked, do you want to have a conversation? We were all home, locked down. And they said, yes, of course. And it's very interesting because the interview to Murray, the interview to Verena had more than 11,000 views. That for us, Jungians, the niche we are is like millions in real numbers for YouTube. So it confirmed my intuition that Jungian analysis, analytical psychology is still very relevant. And to answer your question, retrospectively, I was looking for psychagogia, what Plato and Socrates describe as guiding of the soul. And this is why such interviews had an enormous reach. Then I started thinking, what can I do? Could a book be interesting? And then I thought it could be interesting if it's not only about interviews. And this is when also Monica came into the cooperation. And we realized that this book is, of course, a memoir of that time, psychagogia, accompaniment, but then also an early investigation in media res, so in the middle of the storm, of what is changing in psychoanalysis. So that's why we contacted many, and I can give you just the name of a few, but we have amazing post-Jungians, neo-Jungians that join our book from all around the world. Susan Rowland, Andrew Samuels, Murray Stein for the first part, as well as Verena Kast, Davide Favero, Renate Daniel, John Beebe, Ursula Brash, Stefano Candelieri, Paul Actinello, Mr. Berg, that was so nice and helpful to support this, and IAAP supported us from the research subcommittee, as well as writing the preface. Olivia del Castillo from Spain, Dan Cross, Canada, Rola Maria Deeb from Dubai, although now she's in London, Daniela Euler-Fuchs from Vienna, Roberto Grande, Italy, etc., Marianne Muller, Switzerland, and we go on because we're almost 25 contributors. The important thing, and then I leave space for Monica, is really we were lost. We needed guidance, and I hope that through this book, this guidance through analytical psychology can really support us as human beings and our patients.
Wow, thank you, Stefano. And now I want to hear from Monica as well.
Yes, thank you very much, Loralee, for this initial question. And thank you also for this invitation. I'm sincerely honored to talk about this book today after 2.5 years, as you reminded. And this gives me the opportunity to remember what was on the background of this book, because, you know, I think my answer to your question, what prompted you to write this book, my answer is very simple in a way. The trauma that we all lived with the pandemic, and when trauma comes in, enter the scene of life, what our minds does spontaneously is to look for attachment bonds. And this spontaneous movement at the time took two shapes, I would say. The first one is on the background of this book, is not the content of this book, but I think it's important to remind. That was the building of a service of psychological support for health staff that we, Stefano and me, together with 5 colleagues, built in Italy during the very early phase of the pandemic at the end of February and the beginning of March, and which was supported by IAP as well. And I remember, you know, as a very emotional time, that beginning. A time when we didn't know what was about to happen, but we had the conscious and unconscious perception that something big was about to happen. And together with these colleagues, Antonio Karim Lanfranchi, Maria Giovanna Bianchi, Alessandra Di Montezemolo, Roberto Grande, Chiara Tozzi, and Eva Pattis Zoya, we built this service of psychological support at the beginning for health staff in hospital, working in hospitals, and then for the general population. And the second movement of attachment, I would say, as a reaction to trauma, was this book. So in this collective atmosphere that in Italy, and I would like to remind the fact that at the time Italy was the first country to have, to have the contagion by coronavirus, to detect the first patient, the so-called patient one. So in this collective atmosphere marked by death, illness, ambiguous losses, consequent difficulty with mourning, but also generous evidence of humanity, of solidarity, in such atmosphere, which for some was the background atmosphere, while for others were directly affected. In both cases, analysts have generally continued to carry out psychotherapies and analysis with their patient remotely. So, and we assisted to the fact that the frame, the traditional container, the traditional temenos of the analytic therapy was unquestionably dissolved in a few days. The general ground rules about the physical setting of place and time, the basic stance of the therapist, the coach, the room with its object. Let's think of the scent play therapy and the centre, the fee, the ways of payment, the rituals of an embodied meeting were completely swept up, and we had to deal with distance meetings. The unprivacy of the double rooms, the therapist and the patients at home, screens, technology failures, and so on. So for a while, each analyst looked for a different way to continue the therapy with their patients. But it wasn't just the setting. For example, for me, it was the fact that the restriction of movements with lockdowns measures, so the restriction in the frequentation of usual places, for example, of our life, offices included, was changing. And that change regarded a fundamental dimension that organizes our existence, the dimension of space and time. So I would say that that was traumatic as well. Together with death, with the fear, widespread fear of contagion and illness and so on. And also because this changed everything, really everything, of how an entire society worked, its support system, its educational system, how family could work, could function, the national health system who couldn't support, couldn't cure people. So something that generally go unnoticed and we generally take for granted because it's the water in which we swim. That was the first time, at least for our generations, that we could experience such a traumatic and extraordinary situations. So with Stefano,
so let me stop you both right here, because this is fascinating, and you're giving us so much rich material. I don't want people to miss it. So what's striking to me, listening to both of you, right? The original question was, what prompted you initially to write this book? And I love what you're doing with this, Monica, especially knowing your background and expertise in connecting this to trauma responses, right? What are the trauma, recognizing it as traumatic. And what I love that you both are articulating is you both were motivated to move into action rather than freeze, which is a much more, I think, common trauma response. Rather than freeze, and I remember this time, I had family actually that were sent to Italy during the height of COVID. So I remember watching Italy. You were ahead of us here in the States in terms of the pandemic and the tracking of it. Yeah. What impresses me with both of you is that you immediately almost immediately moved into action, because when did you start? Well, the project that you're talking about, Monica, and I remember that appearing on the forum, that was launched pretty early on in the pandemic, right?
Yeah. On this topic, I remember that you know, the very first day that the lockdown measure started in Italy, we were in a meeting organizing the service, and I was here where I'm sitting now. I remember with all the colleagues on the screen, and I remember my husband on the other room watching the news. At a certain point, I heard the front door that was shut with a sharp noise, and I thought, okay, here it is, now it's starting, because I understood he went out to shopping at a 24-hour supermarket, because starting from midnight we couldn't go out.
You couldn't leave. You couldn't leave your house. As I remember the pictures on social media of Italians on the balcony, right, sharing food across balconies, because you were literally locked in and locked down. So let me ask you both this. In the beginning months, and maybe it was different in Berlin and Rome. I mean, I love this global perspective that you both bring, but in the beginning, at least here in the US, there was very early on kind of this perspective of, yes, it's bad and the uncertainty, but you know what? We'll get back to normal, right? You know, how long is it going to be before we can go back to normal? We can go back to our practices. We can go back to that. Was that the case for both of you? And if it was, at what point did that dissolve? Or no, did you never feel that we were going, did you know right from the outset, yeah, we're never returning to normal?
Well, Stefano, would you like to start, or I'm going?
You can go, you can go.
Well, my perception is a bit different. I don't think we are back to normal, or better. It depends on what we mean as going back to normal. On one hand, if we, as going back to normal, if we mean going back to interpersonal relationship, close relationship, and you know, going back to our offices and having, you know, more in-person interactions. Okay, yes, in a way we can say we went back to normal. But I must say, I've never had the expectation of a return to the things as they were before, nor in life, nor in analysis. My perception at the time was that we were all facing, you know, a momentous time, an epochal moment that would transform us all in a certain way. And I believe it happened. I hear about this return to normal, but the truth is that the normal, in a way, does not exist, and collective history and personal stories cannot be erased. Of course, vaccines protected us and represented a great wall that resisted the destructive power of the pandemic wave. And thanks to the science, we have returned in a relatively short time to having close personal contacts. But if the question is, did the pandemic have a psychic impact? Did it change us individually and socially? And the analysis, my personal answer is yes, hugely.
Yeah.
It shook our societies, us as individuals, and we have under our eyes the effects of this. We see it, or at least I see it clearly enough in international politics, for example, but also in analysis. And of course, we can, you know, talk more about this, but certainly the analytic container is the point, for example, where analysis has been more profoundly changed. Personally, my practice now is, half of my practice is online. and this started with the pandemic. I didn't know that. I didn't practice so much remotely before. So I don't want to take too much space, but I don't feel, that this having gone back to normal. Yeah. I really don't, this kind of expression doesn't fit for me.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Stefano, what about you?
Before to talk about the normal, the non-normal, the beyond the normal, I was in Italy when the case zero happened, and there was a big storm. The day after, I was able from Milan to travel to Zurich by train and then to Berlin by plane. When I came to Berlin, we, the Italians, were called like the dirty ones, like the Chinese, who are spreading the virus, and also not just from ignorant people, but even from colleagues. On March the 8th, my nephew, Leonardo, was born, and I was really, really upset that I couldn't be there. My parents couldn't be there. My brother and his partner were let alone. And I decided, I felt something too big was happening. I was really pissed off, and I put on Facebook and then on our analysis and activism listserv the fact that I was available to offer free of charge online sessions to those affected. And for me, that was very, very important. That then prompted other things. Because in that moment, I felt that our certainties were actually starting to become suspended. Many people were starting to talk about the suspension of time. I never believed that time could be suspended. Time can be out of joint, but not suspended. But that time doesn't exist. So to answer your question, it's such a philosophical category, what is normal, not normal, that would be too difficult. But for sure, I felt we stepped into the suspension of certainties. And I also hope that being home was a symbolic way to, to move from the extroverted world to the introverted world, and hopefully, especially for us Jungian, an opportunity for depth. But I also came across what Michel Houellebecq said: everything will be the same, just a little bit worse. And perhaps, with the war spreading less than 1,000 kilometers from where I am right now, and geopolitical ups and downs, perhaps Houellebecq was right. So we're not going back to normal. So we're not going back to what it was before. We went through the suspension of certainties that created deep trauma. And we have, as you said in the conversation before we started recording, swim or navigate in the open sea. I truly believe that is what's happening now, not only because we are presenting this book about the lockdown, but what is happening at a collective level has to do something that really didn't end at the beginning of the 20th century. I truly believe that this end of the world as we knew it from Stefan Zweig and the new world after the 20s or the 45 really has something to say. And it's not a case that war started with actually the very strong tension between the Austrian-Hungarian and the Russian had in the 1914 or even before. But now we will go into geopolitics. So back to you, Loralee.
Well, we're already so far off script that it's all good. So here's what I want to say, and I meant to pull this quote before the interview, because I believe it's von Franz, and I apologize for those of you listening. I shouldn't even be bringing it up, but Stefano, what you were just speaking to, I believe it's von Franz. I'll have to find it and send it out when we send out the recorded link. But she writes about when there is a period of extreme isolation, it constellates archetypal realities. I'm badly paraphrasing her quote, right? And so I'm thinking back, Stefano, listening to you and listening to Monica, to all of a sudden the word apocalypse became like it was in the newspaper headlines, you know, so there was this constellation of, you know, archetypal apocalyptic fears and languaging, and that I think was constellated partly by isolation, but partly by where you're going right now, Stefano, which is this, we want to go here because I know this is one of the themes, the suspension of certainties, which I think you, Susan Rowland writes about it in the book, you and Monica both write about it in the book. So let's go there now with this conversation. Let's dig into that theme a little bit.
Yeah, well, this is something that came up during the conversation with Susan. She didn't talk about this expression of certainties. I did after she made a link between the ideas we were sharing. So Monica, myself, and Susan are somehow held the copyright. Apart from the joke, I truly believe that, as I said before, people were talking about the suspension of time, which is impossible. And I really love the work of Agnes Elle on Shakespeare, Hamlet, and Time is Out of Joint. But then I thought, what is really going on? Is time out of joint? Perhaps. Perhaps time is always out of joint. So the suspension of certainties means that what happened in March, April, December, if you were in China, 2019 and then 2020, since the Second World War, since the fall of the Berlin Wall, we, especially in the Western world, so Europe, Central Europe, even Eastern Europe and the US, are accustomed to certainties, which blindly or in a banal ways, wake up, take a coffee or a cup of tea, go to work, bring your kids to school, pick them up, go out for a beer, go to the gym, read a book, have sex, and all the pleasant things of the Western world, or even less pleasant things, yeah? So the lockdown stopped that. We didn't know how long, suspended those certainties. And this is why we started baking, watching Netflix, watching porn, Tindering, and blah, blah, blah. Yeah? Things that would be considered neurotic in a normal day before the start of the lockdown. So how long is the suspension of certainties? Still now, until we will be able to find new, renewed, different certainties, which are our own. I truly think that through analytical psychology, we could look at these things differently, but the majority of people don't. And the fact that on the 24th of February, overnight, as the lockdown started overnight and the media were so bulimic and hysterical about COVID, overnight it was all about war and COVID was gone and forgotten. So also the effect of media should be very, very important. The suspension of certainties in a nutshell is something we're not used to. You know, I have a patient who last week told me, you see, it's difficult, our life, because our parents and grandparents had an easy life. Everything was set sociologically is right. You know, if you're a man, you would do the job of your father. If you're a woman, you would do this and that and not have a job. And now, as Beck says, as sociology says, we are open to freedom and reality. But actually the responsibility is different. And maybe the suspension of certainties is also about your self-responsibility. That night, that month, we become much more responsible in our action. You know, climate change is not a bullshit anymore, and the spread of the virus is not a bullshit anymore. Monica wrote this part on the introduction about actually denial. How many people started to say, no, this is not, this is conspiracy. Last week, there was a patient of mine talking to me again about conspiracy and the Great Reset. And this is very interesting. So I think it's worth to also mention that, Monica, right? This denial complex, as we could put it.
Yes, it's a denial complex, but also, you know, we are really wanting to forget in a way. So the expression return to normal is also a symptom of this will to forget quickly what we experienced. Recently, Stefano and I were in a conference in Assisi, in Italy, which was about global crisis, pandemic, war, and environment. Sometimes I felt as if the topic of the pandemic was outdated. But it happened 2 years ago. I mean, it's very recent, and it was a huge event.
And it is still happening, right, Monica? I mean, here in Berlin, we have another COVID wave. Last week, 3 patients in a day canceled because they're positive.
Yeah, but yes, but we really wish to forget this. And of course, this is an effect of trauma. Talking about the suspension of certainties, before I was saying that the certainties are what we take for granted, the water in which we swim, the time and space and the rhythm of our life, that we cannot see because it's obvious, it's there, and it's the way we organize our activities and relationship and so on. I think this has to do also with the idea of illusion. And in our life, of course, we need illusions. Winnicott says this very clearly. They can be healthy or pathological, of course, but we need illusions. Healthy illusions are those who are reassuring us that everything will be fine. You will remember, of course, the sentence, especially children kept writing on the walls of the schools or even at home during lockdown time. Everything will be fine, everything will go well, and so on. It is the illusion thanks to which we could grow, actually. So it's very important. And we can keep living and creating the world. It's our creative engagement with the world. So a central psychic motivation. On the other hand, disillusionment is also very important, because if we cannot experience the crumble of an illusion, we cannot get in touch with reality. So in a way, this suspension of certainties could be healthy, or might be healthy, still might be healthy if reflected, and in a way, if we are able to think of it, to make our reflections, our considerations, if we can gain something from experience instead of forgetting it straight away.
Yeah, so that would be a question that, of course, we're going off script, but I kind of knew that we would, which is a good thing. So when we're diving into this idea of the panic, the almost primal fear that sets in unconsciously when certainties, and I think it's important to try to articulate what certainties really are being suspended or actually being dissolved. I mean, because I think in my conversations that I'm having right now, one of those is around this, the dissolution of this idea that at some point the hero is going to ride in to save the day, right? The hero, and we were thrown into this global temenos where there was no lone hero that was going to be able to save the day, not even the big pharma companies. No one was able. So this complete and utter dissolution that somewhere there's a hero or heroine who's going to be able to sort this out. So if I were to ask both of you, when you're working with someone who's grappling with, you know, a dissolution of underlying foundational meta-narratives that structure the security of their world, and we're thrown into this collective mix where, you know, in COVID, no one knew what the outcome was going to be. No one knew where the fear. what tools do you use in helping someone navigate their way through that and hold the tension of the suspension of certainty without going into denial or dissociation or some of the other trauma responses?
Well, it's a very tricky job because I have a recent case yesterday, last week, 2 weeks ago, someone that is actually doing what you are describing. But let me share with you an image, maybe inspired by the fact that last weekend I was in Vienna. And of course, when you are in Vienna, you have a sucker and you go to Freud's Berggasse 19. As you know, Freud's house was at the first floor of a nice building, and when you would enter his practice, you would leave your coat to the maid and then sit on the waiting room. Then you would enter the professor's analysis room and leave from a different room. So this is the suspension of certainties. Mm. The waiting room is the time before 2020. The lockdown therapy is actually the session where everything is suspended. Your knowledge is suspended. Yes, your unconscious B is driving you away. But if you stay there, if you are courageous to stay there long enough, yeah, these suspensions might transform into something else. Then you go out and nothing changed. The world is still the same, but your inner world is changed. This was my hope. And now to answer your question, another patient is a fairly new patient that has great difficulties to stay in analysis, especially because her trauma, her family didn't help her to have solid foundation of what is right and wrong, what is certain and uncertain. Yeah. But she doesn't leave analysis. She questions me. She makes me sweat a lot. Yeah. The other day she came in and said, "What do you think of Kanye West?" And I was like, I look like a grandpa. I should know who Kanye West is. Oh yeah, my daughter's Kardashian. And then I said, "What's up with Kanye West?" You know, remembering my training, or Jung saying, ask them to tell you the issue, the matter, the fact, the person, as if you were an alien that just landed. So the narrative that she brought up was about conspiracy theory and cancel culture. And of course, cancel culture is a term that is very common right now, but it's nothing new. 100 years ago, 100 years ago, 1,000 years ago, yeah? So of course, that was trying to test me where I was going, because for her, I am the doctor who believes in medicine. And when she told me that she's no vax, I told them, I respect you. I'm not here to say, put a mask or do this or do that. But with the session came out that actually she has guilty feelings because she lied at job. She says she's vaxxed, but she's not. So this is why she was throwing it at me. And she said something, "So you believe in science because it's proven that blah, 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 blah." I said, "Listen, it's proven that works, doesn't work. But there is a man and a woman now, and we can be open to each other without arguing like other people do. Let's open and say frankly what we think is right and wrong." Yeah, I had COVID and it was bad, not so bad. Maybe it was thanks to the vaccine, maybe not. But I tell you something else, and this comes my relational bit. As a kid, my life was saved by doctors and medicine. So I trust them by default. And this is not because I'm pro or against vax. And this created a bond that is not a social political issue. It's really a bond.
A bond between the two of you, you're saying?
Between us that allow to go deeper instead of, he's another white heterosexual Christian male that takes everything because he's part of the big thing, but the Great Reset will fuck him. Now Monica will give you the theoretical response.
No. No, my response is, the response I was thinking is out of experience, actually. I'm not sure it is the right answer to your question, of course. But what came to my mind is that, you know, the way I respond to this kind of issues is with an unheroic attitude. I mean, just being with the person, just being with the patient, let's call it. But it came to my mind the support, the brief support I gave to one of those who were called heroes during the pandemic, a doctor, a medical doctor in COVID, in intensive care unit, actually, not in a COVID unit, in intensive care unit, full, of course, of COVID, people with COVID. She was a very young person, still studying, because a law in Italy at the time consented to enroll, to hire students in medicine to give support, medical support in the wards, in the units. And I mean, what she told me was totally unheroic. I mean, but the heroic part of her unheroic telling was being there with patients, even in the impossibility of doing something. It was the very early phase of the pandemic. So we didn't have any effective medicine to cure people. And her being there with them was the really heroic part of her unheroic you know, way of being in the world, with people suffering. So
and I think that's part of that suspension of certainty is there were certainly incredible acts of heroism, you know, everywhere around us, and yet the pandemic would not be defeated, right? So that was even in spite of the individual heroes, the nurses, the doctors, you know, what you and Stefano did. And I want to draw attention, I see what Time's saying here, there were not one, but many heroes. That's part of my ongoing conversations, is this emergence, and the story you both opened with illustrates it beautifully, this emergence of collective heroism. And what is that? What is that collective heroism? And I think there's a lot that needs to be developed around that conversation of collective heroism, where people, there's no regard. It's not an egoic driven journey. It's not about the individuation necessarily of the individual, but it is there was a movie out just recently called 13 Alive. I don't know if anyone saw it, about the efforts to rescue the 13 boys from the soccer team in Thailand that were trapped in the cave that was flooded. And when you watch that movie, it so illustrates, I think, a lot of the dynamics that what the two of you did as well in pulling people together around a massive challenge, traumatic challenge. And it's about the group efforts, not one individual.
But let me tell you something that comes from my heart and maybe even pisses me off. I don't believe in heroes. Heroes are narcissistic people that want to compensate something. Real heroes are normal people that do normal stuff, and then when they are called by God or whatever, they are there and give service. Yeah, it's really the opposite. Then to become a hero is to become someone, but to be a normal unknown, like the unknown soldier. The unknown hero is the one that is there to serve. You know, like the doctor that doesn't know what is going on, but he's going to work, and maybe he will even get sick, and maybe he will even die. Yeah. So yeah, we need heroes because we are too little. As Eric Fromm said, when we are not able to bear the responsibility for freedom, we give this responsibility to someone else, and this someone else become a dictator. He wrote this in 1941.
So let me put this back on you, Stefano. So, is this dissolution of this romanticized idea of the hero that Jungians, Joseph Campbell, is this part of possibly a good thing of recognizing that it's normal people performing acts of heroism individually and collectively that is emerging? Can we say that that might be part of the silver, lining that's emerging from this?
Heroism as egoistic hopes and expectation for yourself that you will have a statue is numb and wrong. The firefighter who lost their life at the Trade War Center in 2001 are heroes who didn't want to be called heroes.
Right. And I think most genuine heroes, if you were going to use this term, right, in the moment, they're not thinking about being a hero. They're motivated by something much bigger. They're motivated by something much deeper. They're motivated by a deeply felt compassion for humanity, and they just act on it.
Or simply duty. Yeah. Because I believe that we are really lost when we need to have a hero every day. And every day on the newspaper, you read about a hero, or on the media. Yeah. And this is dangerous. Dangerous.
So is part of this working through this suspension of certainties and even existing in the middle of this historic moment of this suspension of certainties? Can we say that part of that process is grappling with the mandate that we act heroically, each of us individually, whatever that means? And when I say act heroically, I mean do the everyday thing, show up at work, in the hospital room, show up. Is that part of grappling our way through this?
I don't know if it's about a hero or not, because we Jungians have many versions. You have to become a hero and kill the dragon. You have to actually disinflate and not become a hero. I truly believe that to live our life with wholeness, we really have to lose hopes and expectations, which are the hopes and expectation of becoming someone in our current society. So accept what is given to us and then go on.
When you say lose hopes and expectations of becoming someone, are you talking about ambition, like an egoically driven ambition?
Yes.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean stay home and do nothing.
Right.
But really go inward. Listen to the Vox Dei. Look at your dreams. That is what we do daily with our, and maybe a hint will come from there. This is to be a hero nowadays, to listen to yourself with the big S, obviously.
And to take, and I think to take action, right?
If this is what you are called to do,
right?
Yes.
So let's move into a little bit different. So question, I'm going to go backtrack a little bit. So we know the suspension of certainties was a major theme in the book. Were there other common themes when you were talking and interviewing with and doing this writing? Were there other common themes that emerged from that group?
No.
Well, a lot of themes actually, but it's important to know that the book provided open space to Jungian authors to witness their personal experiences in that early stage of the pandemic. So they could choose whatever topic, whatever theme they deemed important or relevant for them. the idea, and that was Stefano's idea, was to ask them to write as much as possible personal essays. So not so much scholar, but really their personal experience about how they adapted to that early stage. And many themes are touched in this book, really many. The psychological effects, of course, of lockdown, of living in confinement, the question of illness and death, the theme of new beginnings, of addictions and technology, the task of psychoanalysis, the theme of vulnerability and responsibility. There were essays about how the restrictions affected the analytical work, but also very personal accounts of how the relationship with passion changed for good and for bad.
So can we go there a little bit? Because one of the themes I know you both talked about or mentioned is that of disconnection and the loss of an embodied presence. You know, just like we are right now, we're all in these Brady box, you know, these talking heads. Can you talk a little bit about that, each of you, from your experience?
Yes, actually, a lot of essays deal with this topic, and with different views, of course. For example, there is a chapter by John Merchant that reports his research about the personal responses to working online among Jungian analysts, and with the results of this research. There is the essay of Mark Wimborne that highlights the alterations that occur in the field when physical bodies are not mutually present in the room. So the reduction in analytic ritual and frame that occurs when analysis is mediated by a computer, and possible negative impact of these developments. And there is also a very interesting chapter by an analysant, so a patient, that reflects on the phases of approaching and departing from the analytic hour as an integral part of therapy. So her reflections are about this part of the analysis and how that changed during the pandemic, and so in online analysis. So really the body and in remote analysis was a very intriguing topic for many authors. And I think it's very interesting to read all these perspectives, because they are really diverse and varied, and each of them brings in valuable insights into the topic, which is something controversial, of course, and it has to be. I don't know if my personal view is relevant here, but I think we don't know very much about this topic. And what we say is often our personal preference.
But that's why we decided to do another book in 2-3 years about it, right? So actually, not a joke. We proposed Routledge Volume 1 right now and Volume 2 in 2-3 years. If I can add something.
Yeah.
No, also stimulated by normal, subnormal, abnormal, post-normal. I remember it was, I think, 2016 or 17. I was in Milan, my hometown, and I wrote to Luigi Zoya and I said, let's have a coffee. And we had a coffee, and I asked him, do you see patients in person? Do you see them online? And he said, la compresenza. So being there one-to-one with his voice, being there is important. And of course, Luigi, like Eva, like everyone else, switched online for a simple reason. If we don't see patients, we don't get to the end of the month. We depend on them. Would be nice to not depend and do analysis like Abraham so that you don't have to be paid, but it's not. So this is the first thing that is post-normal. My practice right now is 60% online, 40% live in Berlin. The majority of the 60, actually the 100% of the 60% is around the world. North America, South America, Asia, Israel, etc., etc., etc. But also these, maybe the academic or the research, Einstein used to say, if we knew what we were doing, we wouldn't call it research. And this is what happened. I felt during the pandemic that everybody felt it. Maybe we feel it even now, not only because for us in Europe it's late, but because being in front of a screen is exhausting, and being in front of a screen for 5, 6, up to 10 hours was deadly. So one day I had an intuition, you know, I'm an intuitive type, if we want to follow the Jungian categories. I proposed to all my patients to switch off the video and to become not Freudians, but Freudianist, if we can say. So both to lie down on the couch, on the bed, sit on an armchair and close our eyes, and to connect on a different level. Why? For many technical reasons. Patients were switching from a work, Skype or Zoom to me and going back. So that entering the waiting room, entering the analyst room, going out and going home was lost. Many patients didn't like it, especially the most traumatized. Many that were stuck and were in need of abstraction actually benefit from it. So try.
So wait, I want to make sure, I want to be clear on what you just said. So many did not like the shutting off the video and just...
Some of those that were very traumatized for other reasons didn't like it.
Right.
But those that maybe were less traumatized could do that. And they benefit from it. And we're still working with it. Actually, this is my way. Now, if you want to work with me online from everywhere in the world, we have like 4 sessions with video and then we switch it off. And it works. This is also suspension of certainties, you know.
Right.
I see Lynn and Vreni, who are very experienced Jungians, and if we were going to go back to normal, the normal would be go back to the praxis and sit in front of each other. Let's open, let's try things.
Yeah, I totally agree about, you know, experiment. I mean, because I really think we don't know very much about the body in online analysis. I'm thinking now of a patient of mine who lives in another country. So we are doing remote analysis. Some days ago, he couldn't arrive at his place in time to do his session. So he called me and asked me, do you mind if we do session while I'm walking to get home? And he told me also that this will take most of the time of the session. So after a quick review in my mind of the possible reasons why this was happening, I accepted. And in the end, he thanked me because he told me, you know, walking and talking at the same time made me feel so close, so intimate as I've never felt through the video. He joked saying, maybe what we did was EMDR. He was referring to the bilateral, you know, brain stimulation involved in walking. So I believe that the body in a way is equally involved in these new ways of meeting. Even if we cannot think of it properly, we don't know very much about this. Maybe neuroscience can help us to understand how we are embodied in online analysis. Or the meaning, for example, that the distance between the actual bodies has for the patient. For example, many analysts report that patients who suffered physical and sexual violence feel safer in such a setting.
Yeah.
Or in a chapter written by a patient in the book, it emerges how motor fantasies can accompany transference and online therapeutic meeting. And motor rituals the patient does before the opening of the screen. I mean, there's a lot to learn here, I think, for the future.
And perhaps this shouldn't be used as a textbook. When we presented it to Routledge, we were a little bit concerned that it was not academic enough. But who cares, first of all? And second, Routledge was also courageous, like us. Yeah, we were heavily criticized actually to write a book in the middle of the storm, not even doing a proper research. But we hope that this is what I always say with Monica. I'm happy that if one person or few person get some insight and these changes them, really is a way out of the suspension of certainties and a bond. You know, we try with this book to create a bond, and what you, Monica, said about this patient is actually the bond beyond the rules of the setting.
Yeah, and I was just about to say that. I think that Stefano and Monica, what you're doing, what's coming through to me very much so, is connection in the middle of the trauma, right? We don't have the answers. We're not writing the academic textbook to say, here's the formulaic journey, here's what you do, here's how you do it. But we're all going to be vulnerable and share our own experiences. And, you know, maybe 2 years from now, the textbook will come, Stefano. Maybe you will write that textbook 2 or 3 years from now, or maybe not. Maybe we will recognize that we live in a world where this suspension of certainties is going to be with us for a very long time. Maybe the delusion was the fact that there were certainties to begin with. Maybe that was the delusion.
I know. And also, I think, having had the pleasure to work with Gigerich in supervision, to write the dream down. So to write our difficulties or fantasies or whatever here is therapeutic per se. For Monica and I, well, sometimes it was not really therapeutic, actually. It was
well, and you know, we didn't say this at the beginning, and I want to. Can you hold the book up again, Stefano? So I want to let people know, and I think there's not to go really Jungian and everyone, but that book cover was drawn and designed by Stefano's then 8-year-old daughter, Carlotta. And, you know, I think that's so fitting. You know, a little child shall lead them. That on the cover of this book, it's encapsulated by this young 8-year-old girl who's going to be growing up in this world of suspension of certainty, who's coming of age in this world. So she's going to have a very different perspective and a very different orientation. She
started school online. You know, she was in first grade when COVID started, and library, of course.
So last question, and then I want to open it up to all of you. So you know, if you are muted, once we kind of wrap with this last question, we'll open it up for your comments, thoughts, questions for Stefano and Monica. And this is a huge question, so go with it where you want to, which Stefano, I know you're going to do that anyway, so I'm not worried about it. I'm saying that for Monica's benefit. But this question is, at this point in the journey, in our collective journey, in your individual journey with a global pandemic, that I think we all have to recognize might be the first, but probably will not be the last, if we're really honest with ourselves. I mean, I think the possibility of other global pandemics is an ongoing one. What do you see as being, the question was the losses and the gains for the theory and practice? That's a huge question. So pick any part of that question. What do you see as being our losses, or what do you see as being our gains as a result of this journey and where we are in that journey?
Well, I have a very brief I would say, answer to this. Actually, the question is huge, and I don't feel, you know, enough to give a true answer to this big question. But we have to keep it in mind. Speaking of losses, of course, we have perhaps lost some professional certainties, as we said before. The comforting idea that the setting of analysis could be taken for granted, that the frame was stable, that we could forget of the setting or of the, you know, the frame. Now instead the framework must be conceived, reflected, negotiated within the request for analysis, and we can't just apply what have been taught. We need to experience, even experiment, as we said before, and we need to know more precisely under what conditions we are able to work personally. So we might say our personal preferences, whether online is good for us, under what conditions, telephone, video, video on, video off. So in a certain sense, I think we have lost the stability of the setting. Well, before it was the patient, maybe, especially, for example, borderline patients who might challenge the setting. Now it is, we can say it is the word that challenges the traditional setting of analysis and ask for adjusting it to the word in a way. We must know, it's important that we know our position at this regard, what makes us feel comfortable enough to do analysis. The earnings, from my point of view, are many, or I have this intuition that they can be many and of greater value for psychoanalysis. We can gain the opportunity to find out what analysis really is. This is the main point, probably, why it works and when it doesn't. There is almost nothing that now we can take for granted, because setting is, you know, a background rule. So the question now is, what is the analytical container in the very end? Thomas Ogden wrote that the analytic container in the end is not a thing, but a process. I have to say that I agree very much on this point, but maybe it needs more study and experience and reflection. Probably each of us can give a different answer to this question, and this opens the floor to shared and deeper reflections, and this is the best part, I would say, of this experience. We can discover new things, I hope, about psychoanalysis. This is my idea.
Well, thank you. Thank you. It's a beautiful idea. Thank you, Monica. Stefano.
I totally agree with Monica. It couldn't be anything else, because we are co-authors, but also friends. I really like the way we work together. I think what we lost is virginity. Of course, not in a sexual way, but virginity means being virgin to the uncertainty of the real world, especially to the Western world. Yeah, so we lost that purity, that even naivete. I don't know if there will be another pandemic, and actually these days I'm trying to work on the link or the bridge between the suspension of certainties and the end of certainties, when especially we look at the war and the atomic threat, which is very paranoid. You know, you were talking about what you say? You said something, but then we're talking about Armageddon. not just
the apocalypse.
not,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
so you see, it's always more from the apocalypse
Mm-hmm.
to Armageddon, from 10
Mm-hmm.
bombs dropped yesterday to 100 today. So we lost our virginity. Maybe we gain self-knowledge, but again, we could have gained an opportunity for self-knowledge and depth, but we missed that opportunity. And maybe not as Jungians, but of course as Jungians, because we're not.
Well, wait a minute. All right. So now you have to tell us why. Why are you saying we missed that opportunity for depth?
Because we were locked for 90 days, 100 days. And then when we got out, the majority, of course, really banal and generalistic, but all we wanted was to drink more gin and tonic, to go on holidays longer, to not wear a mask. And we forgot about the pain, the losses, the sweat, the smell, the fact that many lost people. I had patients who lost mother and father and couldn't bury them. And they said, this is not right. This is unjust. We forgot that. This is the missed opportunity for self-reflection and depth. I mean, I'm 44, I should say something else. But actually, if we don't look at this, we will miss what Jung was saying with Wotan and after the catastrophe, which are fundamental texts right now. But Jung focused too much on Hitler and too little on Wilhelm II. So the Kaiser in Germany, who will be very well analyzed, not with Freudian or Jungian analysis, but with Adlerians. He's the one who actually pushed to start the First World War, to get full power in Europe. So this is very important. Miss opportunities.
I mean, I hear you. I don't agree with you 100%. I think that there are people, and maybe I'm more of a Pollyanna and an optimist. I think, thinking about myself and my own experience, and people that I know, colleagues that I work with, as a result of that lockdown, it fundamentally, it not only changed my behavior, but it changed my perspective and my outlook, and in a way that there's no going back, there's no returning. So, the value and the gratitude I feel for the opportunity to be together with my 2-year-old grandson and wrap my arms around him, who actually was born in Italy at the height of COVID, and I could not get to him. So the panic of a grandmother who couldn't be there with my family when I most wanted to and was most needed, is a significant trauma that has forever changed, I think, me and my approach. So I hear what you're saying. I agree that there may be some. I think that that's part of your motive for writing this book. It's part of what everyone coming together right now is sharing, is not to lose that opportunity to really take a minute and pause and reflect, and to recognize that we're moving forward into a very different place, and we're moving forward different than when we entered. We're leaving the analytic container much differently than when we entered. And I think that that's the hope. I think that's the hope that your work gives us, and the way that you challenge. I think that's the hope. So thank you both. This has been a very deep and wonderful conversation. We are trying to fit a lot into a short amount of time. I want to open it right now to all of you who are on. So I'm going to change this view to the gallery view and invite you to unmute yourself and feel free to share a comment, ask a question of Stefano and Monica. So welcome, everyone. Questions, comments, you're also very reflective right now.
Rainy and Lynn unmuted them, so this is a good sign.
I thank you so much for presenting this book. I realize, and although, you know, what you presented about your thoughts, about your experiences, I realized, wow, I've been kind of moving on as if, you know, our wonderful president said, as if the pandemic is over. Means not so much going back to normal, but it's sort of, because nothing's normal. And I mean, I don't mean that just philosophically. Literally almost everything changed in my life, even though I still have the same office and the same house and the same old computer and the same bookcases, but everything has changed. I am such, my perspective is so different. But, you know, I haven't processed enough of the change, and your book and the talking right now has introduced how much I need to be processing what has just happened in this world. Yeah. War is sort of familiar. That it's frightening and terrifying, but that's not the new experience for me. The new experience is all that happened since the beginning of what was the pandemic and the deaths. And so I thank you. That's what I want to say.
Lynn, let me say something that is fun, but this corner in your praxis or in your room is comfort for me, because since the early stages of the pandemic, you always connected from that. So it's beautiful. You know, one of the things that didn't change. And then something else on what you said, to process, you have to be courageous. That's what with other words, my first analyst said, you're very courageous to raise your hand and call me and come here and sit on that chair. But you have to be much more courageous to stay here long enough so that process happens.
Yeah.
That's why I am negative, not only about patients. Maybe with patients I'm not that negative, but with society. Why would Italians vote for Meloni when we had Draghi in the past year? That helped very much. Why the Americans would like to vote Trump again after what Trump did? Why the Russians are not able to throw away Putin? Well, of course, for a certain reason, but...
Thank you, Lynn. I wanted also to say something. While we were talking about processing and about things that changed and didn't at the same time, I was thinking that maybe what we are missing and what we missed in these 2 years is the question why this happened. I mean, why the pandemic happened. I mean, it's not the only pandemic or epidemic of the history, of course, as we know very well, but why it was so hugely, the impact was so huge. We missed this question. If there is, but I have to say that implicitly and explicitly, it is a question that runs through some of the essays of this book, not addressed so directly, but it is something. It is a question that runs along the essays, but it is the main question, actually, of what we recently lived.
Yeah.
I think this is something really worth to try to respond. Why this happened.
There are two Italian sociologists, one of which Monica invited to the conference in Assisi, Mauro Magatti and Chiara Giaccardi. They, as sociologists, look at society, of course, Bauman, Liquid Society, Beck, the Risk Society, and they call the past 20 years the shock society or the super society, where shocks happen and before they even maybe ended to happen, there is another shock. Twin Towers, 2008 crisis, pandemic, and now the war within 20 years. How can we deal with this psychologically? I mean, 100 years ago, we had World War I, and then the Spanish flu that came from the US. And this, for me, is also another shift of empire. 100 years ago, the European empire gave the crown to the US, and now perhaps the crown will go to China. We don't know where the pandemic started, but it's also a shift of culture. If the empire goes to China and not anymore the Western empire, what is going to happen? Not only to our lives, but, collectively, from a cultural point of view, from an unconscious point of view. It's interesting.
Yeah.
Recently, I interviewed George Jorgensen about war is reset. And he said, possibly the pandemic, the war is really the end of an era, maybe the end of the era of Christ, but really an end that has been prolonged in the past 50, 100, even 200 years. And our certainties will be thrown away. And it's interesting also to see the dreams that our patients have. Dreams we cannot really understand are so symbolical, so collective. And it's like, what is going on? And are we trained for this? I don't know if my generation is trained for this. Yeah, for these highly symbolical dreams that could predict the future or even scarier than hell. Vreni, say something meaningful.
Excuse me, I would like to say a lot of things if you would allow me to.
Yes.
You don't know me, but nonetheless, I'm a person with a lot of experiences on many levels. And I have to say that for me, my experience with COVID was totally alchemical. And I believe that we can't speak for each person because the whole thing collectively and individually to me seems alchemical. We're conjoining opposites with the Trump and with pandemic and with certainty and uncertainty. And for me, as a result of COVID, I was very ill. I was a professional physician assistant for 40 years practicing alternative medicine, and I cured myself. Otherwise, I could have died from COVID. And as a result, however, I am a disabled person physically. I cannot walk. COVID knocked the shit out of my body. And so for me, it's not just the loss of virginity, it's an initiation into now what's certain, what can be certain for any of us. And do we even believe that there can be certainties? Because up until a year ago, I could walk, I could hike, I could climb over rocks. And now I walk with a walker. So, I think that the whole Trump thing was just the opposites pulling apart so that we could smash together and get into some sort of minor and major transformations. Because for me, that's what it is personally. And that's all I can make sense of it. So thank you. And thank you for mentioning that suspension of certainty theme, because that really opens up a lot for me to understand more of what I and other people are going through. Thank you.
And thank you for reminding us how all this is serious.
Thank you for sharing your experience of losses. Many of us had some losses out of the pandemic. So thank you very much for mentioning your own experience with this.
I just want to say, on the other hand, it's been so powerful inwardly, my journey, my dreams, my reflection. I wouldn't have it any other way. And I wouldn't go back to, I've never been somebody that goes and drinks a gin and tonic, but I wouldn't, and my life was very beautiful, but it's still beautiful in a very different way, because I've shifted in consciousness in a major way. And I see things with different eyes. That's all I can really say. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing. What a beautiful note to bring us to the conclusion of finding a different way to beauty. That's your gift to us at the conclusion of this conversation, not to idealize or romanticize, but to find our own way and a different way to the beautiful. What that looks like may be forever changed for all of us. So Stefano, Monica, thank you for the gift of your work, for the inspiration in sharing, your process, not only your process, but what you did, how you took action, even at the very beginning, in the midst of this, the collective heroism that you each constellated. And thank you to all of you for joining us today for this conversation. I do want to let you know, we will be, Monica and Stefano will be offering I think I said 4 weeks somewhere. It's actually a 5-week series where you will get to have one-on-one time with each of them, and they will have the time to go into much more depth than we had time for here to these conversations. And you will also get to hear from, is it 2 or 3 other authors that contributed to the book, right? 3 other authors that contributed to the book. So just visit our website, and I think that's going to be happening in March, actually. So you've got time, to visit our website and to register for that. That'll be a 5-week series of really digging deeply into these themes. So thank you. Thank you, Monica. Thank you, Stefano. Thank you to each of you for what you shared and for your presence in this. I hope to see you all again soon. Take care, all.
Thank you
very much.
very much.
Thank you for being there. Bye.